Okay, today is the 4th of February 2022, and we'll talk about four architects, one of them born on the 4th of February in 1919, and that is Frank van Klingeren. And then we'll talk about three architects who all died on the 4th of February, but of course, years apart. That is Boullee, Kramer, and Xenakis. But let's start with the Dutch architect, and that is with Frank van Klingeren. A less known architect, but I think quite an interesting architect. And again, okay, so Frank van Klingeren was, unlike Herman Hahn, a real outsider in the Dutch architecture scene of the 1960s and 70s. Trained as a construction engineer, he was a self-taught architect that kept away from architecture gatherings or cliques. He was more at home among people from avant-garde theater of the period than among forum architects like Van Eyck, Bakema, and Herzberger, although he shared a lot of his ideas with the latter. They even received the Fritz Schumacher Prize in 1974 together. Herzberger for his central back here office in Apeldoorn, and Van Klingeren for T. Carregat in Eindhoven, both buildings celebrating multifunctionality and an openness towards change. Let me read again: openness towards change. And again, openness towards change. I hope those who should hear this do hear this, but I'm afraid they won't. Openness towards change. Although Frank van Klingeren was quite productive as an architect from the late 50s to the mid 70s, his main claim to fame was established with the design of three consecutive multicultural community buildings, or agora as he called them. I ask for forgiveness for my pronunciation. I do not know Dutch. The Marpal in Dronten, Agora in Lelystad, and T. Carregat in Eindhoven. But his media presence was broader than ever, especially after finishing the Marpal. He evolved towards a counterculture, societal, critic and television personality, while keeping his distance from direct involvement in flower power, hippie or provo movements. He was, in that sense, a provocateur in a business suit. You saw the word counterculture there, and yeah, maybe we need more architects that are friendly, so to speak, with what is called the counterculture. Now, here is one of the buildings that I read about, whose name I prefer not to pronounce because it is uncomfortable for me. Of course, the building doesn't strike us as being, you know, immensely unusual or anything, but we also have to consider the time when it was built. Even by today's standards, this is you know, a clear-cut modernity. The problem is, of course, too much glass, in my opinion, but glass at that time, at least, was not considered to be, you know, the enemy of the people, to talk in the terms of Henrik Ibsen. But I like what I see inside. You know, these informal, spontaneous gatherings and activities that you wouldn't really expect easily in any kind of building. This is not a, you know, a sports arena professionally dedicated to, you know, a certain sport and so on. It's an open space that, you know, receives all kinds of activities. And I like the fruitful disorder of these all kinds of activities. As you can see, many things happen here, you know, a market, a sport, and all the rest. There is a democratic spirit in the Netherlands, which I admire. Now, another kind of similar building, this Agora Lelystad. So there is the idealism of that time somehow present in this architecture, considered it to be countercultural. If by counterculture means to go against the grain, against the hyper-individualism, against the, what high capitalism advocates. So while construction work for this place, the Merpal, was still going on, Van Klingeren was commissioned to design a similar multifunctional building for Lelystad, the second new town to be built in Flevoland and planned to become the largest city and capital of the new Polder province. The first design elaborated further on the open concept and mix-up functions of the Merpal. In this case, however, the scale was larger, and Van Klingeren managed to lure in the churches 3 different denominations into the collective. Although each church would have its own space, it was to be open like an open-air theater, and Van Klingeren argued, since these spaces would only be used on Sundays, they could double as extra theater and meeting spaces for the rest of the week. What a beautiful idea to bring 3 religious denominations within the same space. I know, Orthodox religion would strongly oppose something like this, but in my opinion, many wars of the world are exactly because of this inflexibility of religion. After all, how many gods are there in the sky? And why not have different denominations share a common space? Meanwhile, it was decided that not Lelystad, but a newer town, Almere, to be built closer to Amsterdam would be more important and bigger, and construction of Lelystad was delayed. This meant that the scale and budget of Van Klingeren's Agora diminished too. Instead, Van Klingeren proposed the opposite, to enlarge the program with shops and housing facilities, hotel, boarding house, but to do this within the limited budget. To do more with less was one of his favorite slogans. And I think we should have a similar slogan, to do more with less. He proposed a U-shaped steel post and beam structure of 3 stories to be left open and to be so-called colonized over time by the people and by entrepreneurs. The ground floor would still be like the previous building we saw, but a swimming pool was added to the programmatic mix. This open ground floor would be connected to the adjoining park, so much so that Van Klingeren started to title the different zones in the layout as if they were landscapes. Theater landscape, youth cave, swimming and undressing landscape, etc., all in an open wall-less setting. While the Merpal could be called urbanism, realized with architectural means, this last design for Lelystad would have been a landscape design instead, growing over time. The proposal proved to be too radical for Lelystad, and a toned down conventional agora was built in the city center by one of Van Klingeren former employees. So we see now that Kergat in Eindhoven, or center, the Kergat Center in Eindhoven from 1970. This was a very, as you know, was a very, very, interesting time at the end of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s. Was tumultuous, the youth was proclaiming a new modus vivendi, fighting for love and not for war, and so on. So there was a great social interest in the attributes of architecture. Estate centers are now really beginning to appear. With a single flexible structure, they combine all the facilities required by a community, from schools to health centers, libraries, gymnasiums, restaurants, supermarkets, and banks, all within pedestrian distance from homes. This example, which is now even for Holland, which is new even for Holland, belongs to Herzenbrücken estate, recently built to the east of Eindhoven. It has 1,700 apartments for some 7,000 inhabitants, almost all of whom are young couples. This estate occupies a slightly higher and undulating site on the edge of the estate, surrounded by a green belt. It has a ground floor on 3 gently staggered levels and basement floor. The structure is formed by 37 large square self-bearing canopies in steel and glass with shafts spaced at intervals of 14.40 meters. In the meantime, the interior is lit by the sun through the glass roofing, and in the evening by a system fitted into the framework of the canopies themselves, together with a heating system. Ventilation is effected by openings in the pitched roofing, which allow fresh air to enter, and by means of aspirators housed in the top of canopies. Estate dwellers will find everything they need here without having to waste time going for miles in different directions every day. Things like shopping, taking the children to school, or going to the doctor can all be done under the same roof. Parents going shopping can see their children attending lessons inside the same place. And this makes school more natural and spontaneous. Do we want school to be more natural and spontaneous? Of course not. We want to control the students, not to let them be spontaneous and free. But there was a different conception, and bravo to them. Just as the covered piazza in the middle of the center, used for games, concerts, and meetings, is also natural. Designed at the same time as the estate, with a consultancy of sociologists, doctors, and teachers, this center was ready for its users, for the estate inhabitants when they moved in. However, they have taken to it with a natural and enterprising spirit. The center really works. The architecture, which is simply a system of roofing, sorry, you are now always missing, is at the same time an identifying sign and landmark. And here it is. So in essence, it's a carcass, it's a large space dedicated to an amalgam, to hybridity, essentially. And it works. It works. It's a techno hybridity. The structure is technological, but not devoid of aesthetical values, as you can see, because these vertical things are rather sculptural and interesting. And look, of course, this was not during the pandemic done. The pandemic changes many things, but in conditions of normality, this worked very well. And it is this social cohesion that creates the dynamics of such a life. It goes so well with the ideals of the time and with democracy and so on. So he built this. What we look at is what he built. And underneath, various functions and activities took place and could take place. So this was Frank van Klingeren, an architect, I would say interesting, and interesting exactly because he assumed the social aspects of architecture in an almost radical way. But this social radicalism didn't neglect aesthetics, as you can see here. With simple means, much was done. Indeed, as he wanted to arrive at, that is to do more with less. I admire this kind of approach. But yes, perhaps in order to do something like this, you need a certain level of social cohesion and a tradition of democracy, which not all countries have, unfortunately. Frank van Klingeren. it helped also, of course, that this happened at the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, a time of you know, almost of revolution. Here we are looking at architecture as a mechanism, as a tool to encourage, you know, almost a different kind of life, of togetherness, of spontaneity, of democracy openly assumed and openly practiced. Look, the children are studying in this way. You know, their parents might do the shopping not too far away and pass by and say hello. This is you know, a way of living that it would still seem radical for our time, but I like very much what I look at here, you know, because it's the frontiers, the separating frontiers are dissolved or you know, diluted, reduced in reduced in dimensions or intensity. To bring together, of course, the conventional teacher would say nonsense. The student cannot learn in such a space. It's not true. This is based on the idea to combine work with pleasure or work with play, and this is what the dogmatic form of control. This is the type of life and which is not happy to use the mechanisms of control. This is not about controlling. This is about investing the people with a faith in them that they could take decisions for themselves, and spontaneously they can create auspicious circumstances. And the architect just built, you know, in a way, the infrastructure for a healthier society. Okay, maybe it's an experiment, but it seems it worked, and it works. Bravo to the Dutch that they, you know, they are so open-minded that they allow for such things to happen. You can imagine that the children that grow up in such an environment will have a great chance later on to be themselves open-minded and open towards dialogue, towards connecting. In essence, you know, architecturally speaking, was not a complicated thing. He found a module that worked and multiplied it, and underneath the roofing, you know, allowed for activities to happen. Now, I don't know what is here. Was it during the construction or during some kind of a renovation? The nobility and the simplicity of the architectural solution, which is in its essence rather structural, is still there for all to see. Van Klingeren, Frank van Klingeren. Okay, and now we'll go to the second architect we'll talk about today. A very different kind of architect and from a different time. That is Etienne Louis Boullee, the famous so-called visionary architect. The one Louis Kahn wrote so eloquently about, not just about him, but of course his companion, so to speak, Ledoux. So Etienne Louis Boullee died on February 4th, 1799. So let's talk a little bit about him. You know, the 18th century as opposed to the 20th century, and you know, the kind of vision this architect had is rather almost unknown to us today. I read these words, an emotionally committed neoclassicism. It's almost oxymoronic because neoclassicism often is not quite emotionally charged, or it appears not to be emotionally charged. But he was considered a visionary architect. In my opinion, any good architect is, to an extent at least, so-called visionary. But he was explicitly, not just to an extent, so-called visionary. So Etienne Louis Boullee, you see, he was born on the 12th of February. So it means in 8 days we'll talk again about him. He died on February 4th. Was a visionary French neoclassical architect whose work greatly influenced contemporary architects. Boulee's fondness for grandiose designs has caused him to be characterized as both a megalomaniac and a visionary. His focus on polarity, offsetting opposite design elements, and the use of light and shadow was highly innovative and continues to influence architects to this day. He was rediscovered in the 20th century and was influenced and has influenced recent architects such as Aldo Rossi. Well, he influenced others as well, and we'll see a few examples here. Salon for the Hôtel de Tourol, Hotel Alexandre, also known as Hotel Soult, is a hotel particulier in the 8th arrondissement of Paris, designed by Boullee. Well, very few built works by him survived. The building was constructed from 1763, so 250 years ago, to 1766, and is the best surviving structure designed by Boullee. You know, the resolution is as it is. It's better here in the drawing. You know, the so-called megalomania or visionary aspect of his architecture is less perceivable here in the built works. But will arrive. That's why I keep saying that the drawing in architecture could have a lasting impact, just as the drawings of Boullee have more impact than his built work. Anyway, this is indeed neoclassicism. If it is emotionally charged, I don't know. If we mean by, yes, to an extent, if it is a more sensitive neoclassicism, you know, and we see here touches of, you know, so-called sensitivity, mainly expressed through ornamentation, but it's a softened neoclassicism. Now, a photograph of the building from 113 years ago by a famous photographer, Eugène Aché. Here it is. I mean, it doesn't matter what the old photographs represent, they are still nice. I always like the old photographs because the passage of time makes them, I don't know, sensitive and impressive. Now, we arrive finally at his most famous, I shouldn't say finally because I just began the presentation, but this work is very well known. in the cenotaph for Sir Isaac Newton from 1784. He obviously valued Newton more than the students in architecture in our country, who refused to climb on the shoulders of the giants, as Isaac Newton did, in order to see far away, that is, to be himself a visionary. Now let's read a little bit about this famous work, which remained, at the level of what was called paper architecture. Boullee promoted the idea of making architecture expressive of its purpose, a doctrine that his detractors termed architecture parlante, talking architecture, which was an essential element in Beaux-Arts architectural training in the later 19th century. His style was most notably exemplified in his proposal for a cenotaph. I don't know very well how to read cenotaph, a funerary monument celebrating a figure interred elsewhere, for the English scientist Isaac Newton, who 50 years after his death became a symbol of the Enlightenment. The building itself was a 150 meters tall sphere, taller than the Great Pyramids of Giza, encompassed by two large barriers circled by hundreds of cypress trees. Of course, the cypress tree is, symbolic of death. Just a second. The massive and spheric shape of the building was inspired by Boullee's own study called Theory of Bodies, where he claims that the most beautiful and perfect natural body is the sphere, which is the most prominent element of the Newton memorial. Though the structure was never built, Boullee had many ink and wash drawings engraved and circulated widely in the professional circles in 1784. The small sarcophagus for Newton is placed at the lower pole of the sphere. The design of the memorial is intended to create the effect of day and night. The night effect occurs when the sarcophagus is illuminated by the sunlight coming through the holes in the vaulting, giving the illusion of stars in the night sky. The day effect is an armillary sphere hanging in the center that gives off a mysterious glow. Thus, the use of light in the building's design causes the building's interior to change its appearance. Here it is. We all know it. So what we see here, these are the cypress trees. And yes, it's not the most modest architectural structure ever imagined by human beings. You see the human beings are the little insects here at the bottom. Did he value Newton? I would say so. I mean, maybe too much. And here are the other famous drawings of this famous, architecture parlante. But I think an architecture parlante is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, Paul Valéry thought that out of the three builders, the first one being the one who places a stone above another stone and he's a builder, and then the second who places a stone above another stone and makes them talk, that is architecture parlante, narrative architecture. He's a master builder. And then the third one who does the same thing but makes them sing, and his name is Opalinos, as Paul Valéry said, or the architect. So again, this is an architecture which a dreamer could conceive of, but if you are not dreaming, you can never arrive at something like this. Now, I don't know if it was built, if it would have had the same fascinating, effect on us as the drawings do, because the drawings are idealized versions of what the so-called reality might be. Etienne Louis Boullee. The cenotaph for Isaac Newton. He also designed other things. We are going to see a library, again of huge dimensions. Yeah, this is the man who indeed deserves the wording, visionary. But then the Egyptian pyramids were not visionary, and a lot of the architecture of the past, we lost that, dialogue with cosmos, with the infinite. Now I want to show a building built in, of all places, in Tijuana, in northern Mexico, or Mexico, the frontier with the United States, Centro Cultural Tijuana, by these architects. You read their names there, which was inspired by this visionary project by Boullee. Here it is. Yeah, you wouldn't expect this sort of thing coming from a city like Tijuana, because Tijuana is a place described by many as a place of human perdition and lost souls. But look, Boullee found some kind of a follow-up right there. And you wonder, is this the irony of fate? Here we see children kind of like playing like in Eindhoven, in the Netherlands, in the project of the previous architect we talked about. Here are the people building this huge sphere. Now it's not so big as what Boullee envisioned, but still, it's an interesting homage in a way to Boulée. And we are going to see another one as well. Now, Mexico is an interesting country, actually, and it's not at all what the description of former President Trump about Mexico was. No. I spent a few days there, and I can say that I saw pride and even culture, and it's a different country than the one Hollywood depicts, and the one, as I said, the former president of the United States depicted. I'm not saying that there are no problems. Of course there are, but in any society there are problems, not just in Mexico. So reflections of 18th century visionary architecture in present day Tijuana in Mexico. Now, the second, this was a project he did several, this is the second for the Library of the King, La Bibliothèque du Roi from 1785. And again, an immodest building, but dedicated to something equally majestic, like Newton, that is knowledge. So it was designed by Boulée in 1785, 200, almost 50 years ago, 40 years ago, and unbuilt, of course. But MVRDV built something inspired both by this and by the previous project that I showed, the cenotaph for Newton. It was supposed to be huge, but of course it was a library for the king. So, how are you going to make a royal library? Can you make it just a small hole in the ground? Of course not. There are all kinds of, I used to know these details, we see Atlas there, and anyway, there are interesting so-called details here in this huge project. Boullee's unbuilt place de la Bibliothèque du Roi à la Rue. So it exists. It was proposed for a specific site in Paris. It's just that it was not built. The house of knowledge, in a way. I mean, this is what a library is or is supposed to be in its most primal sense. And here we have a scene of, the Platonic Academy, Plato's Academy, painted by Raphael, and this is what Boullee drew inside in the renderings of his library, and this was the idealized vision of Raphael of Plato's Academy. Here, for example, is Michelangelo, and here is Plato and Aristotle, and a kind of life that we don't actually have. Spirit and this kind of highly informed cultural dialogue takes place at the highest level. Because to live in this way is to dedicate your life to knowledge, to contemplation, to asking questions, to discuss. And our society is not willing to invest on such frivolous activities. Otherwise, if you look at this section, you don't realize the immensity of the space, because of it almost looks like almost 2 floors house, but it's not. You see the human silhouette here. It's this section, cross section, is misleading. Now we look at this library built by MVRDV in Tianjin, Binhai Library in China, which was inspired both by the library project by Boullee and the cenotaph for Newton. We have both in a way. But the rhetorics of our time are present here. I mean, look at these books here at the top. They cannot be accessed, and not just those. Even here, they cannot be accessed. So it's in a way showing off culture, showing off itself. It's our time. Yes, there are some books. I mean, there are books that are accessible, but it seems I don't know. I mean, the amplitude, the atmosphere here is different from Plato's Academy painted by Raphael or the rendering by Boullee. These people are consumers of culture. Those people in the painting by Raphael and the rendering by Boullee were not consumers of culture. They were consumed by culture. That's very different. Anyway, it's an interesting project by MVRDV. You probably know it. It was published copiously. So in a way, we have a mini Newton's cenotaph within the library that found some inspiration in the work of Boullee. And I'm glad that MVRDV is having a dialogue with the past, much more active than our students here. Anyway, so this was built in China, of course, the playground of architecture today. Who would build something like this in a European country? No one, because, well, on one hand, maybe the funds are not there, and on the other hand, you need an openness of mind to invest in something that is only to a small degree so-called functional. I mean, just to fill these shelves at this height with books is an activity which, some would consider would be vicious because it do not produce money. Do we need this kind of rhetorics in today's world? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what is this sphere representing or symbolizing or paying homage to. I think to nothing. I mean, I don't know, but as opposed to the project by Boullee, which paid homage to a great scientist and his memory, what is this? I mean, I don't know. I don't want to sound cynical, and I probably do, but I only hope here there are no restrooms, you know. Although I expect something like this in our time to create this idealized, you know, this sphere in order to house, you know, public bathrooms, that is toilets. An interesting work by, and now other projects and drawings by Boullee. We are approaching the end of this short presentation about Etienne Louis Boullee. He was not thinking small. No, this man was competing with Ramses and with the great Egyptian pharaohs. I think he regretted that he was born in the 18th century and not a few thousand years earlier, and not in France, but in Egypt. But you see, even as drawings, they belong to architecture at the highest degree. They serve the spirit of architecture, even as unbuilt works. And they inspire other people. We saw MVRDV being inspired by Boullee. And not just them. We saw the project, the built work in Tijuana, in Mexico. Etienne Louis Boullee, theoretician of revolutionary architecture. Is it really revolutionary? I don't know. I mean, it depends what we mean by revolutionary. Yes, probably the Pantheon in Rome would have found its place here in a rather, you know, small part of this giant structure. I wonder if he could have designed a tiny house like those that are fashionable today. Or Le Cabanon by Le Corbusier. Although considering his talent and intelligence, I think he could have. But I never saw a work by Boullee that was, you know, smaller than some of the largest buildings ever built by humankind. This is a project for an opera house from 1781. Look at this, and this is the plan. You know, it's the mother of all opera houses, if not the father, or if not both. I mean, the plan itself is like, you know, this is the celestial opera, the one and only, where the gods would attend an opera show, not humans. This is not for humans. This is for the gods. He loved the sphere, of course, but so did Ledoux. I remember, and I don't have a great memory with poems. I don't memorize poems, but this one, small one by Louis Kahn, I did, and it was written as an introduction to the works, to an exhibition or a publication with the works of Ledoux and Boullee, and allow me to recite it for you. It's very short, and it was written by Louis Kahn. Spirit in will to express can make the great sun seem small. The sun is, thus, the universe, Did we, did we need Bach? Bach is, thus music is. Did we need Ledoux? Did we need Boullee? Ledoux is, Boullee is, thus architecture is. That's what Louis Kahn wrote. Now, this is a plan for a museum by Etienne Louis Boullee. It's not hard to recognize immediately a vision or a drawing by Boullee. And I don't know what this is, but it's certainly attempting to reach God and nothing else, or no one else. Yeah, this is the last image of this presentation on Boullee, and now we arrive at the third architect I will talk about today. An interesting Dutch architect. Again, the Dutch are, you know, it's not a large country, but they have formidable architects. They had and have. And even MBRDV that we saw the library built in China, they are also Dutch. So today I show the works of three Dutch architects. I show the work of the first architect, and then I showed MBRDV, and now I will talk about an important architect of the School of Amsterdam, an architecture movement that is rather insufficiently known, and in my opinion, very important. And maybe time to appreciate the expressionism will come again, because it's not just expressionism, but it's also a great display of great craftsmanship and an imagination which minimalism tried to kill and almost succeeded. Anyway, Pete Kramer, 1881, 1961. I have a problem with, okay, now we go. This was the man as a young man. So let's read again. Born in 1881 and died in 1961. And so he lived for 80 years, and he was a very important member of what is called the Amsterdam School. So Peter Ludwig Kramer, born on July 1881, and he died on the 4th of February 1961, and that's why we talk about him today, was a Dutch architect, one of the most important architects of the Amsterdam School, Expressionist architecture. From 1903 to 1911, Piet Kramer worked in the architectural practice of Edward Kuipers, where he came into contact with the architects Johan van der Meij and Michael de Klerk. Michael de Klerk, he was the leader in a way of the School of Amsterdam, but he died young, at 39 or at 40. So in 1911, van der Meij received the commission to design the shipping house. We are going to see a formidable building, a cooperative building for 6 Dutch shipping companies. Van der Meij sought the assistance of his former colleague architects Piet Kramer and Michael de Klerk to realize this building. The Schipvaarthuis, the house of shipping, the shipping house, built between 1913 and 1916, so a little more than 100 years ago, is considered the starting point of the Amsterdam School movement. A remarkable architecture movement indeed, the Amsterdam School. So later, Piet Kramer collaborated with Michael de Klerk on the well-known the Daggerad housing project in Amsterdam South. Outside Amsterdam, he built one of his masterpieces. I really have difficulties with the Dutch language. The Vision Korf store in The Hague, almost 100 years ago. After the death of Michael de Klerk in 1923, Piet Kramer was the leading architect of the Amsterdam School until the end of this movement in the beginning of the 1930s. In the years of economic crisis of the 1930s, the expensive architecture of the Amsterdam School was passé. A new architecture and town planning was in the process of development in Amsterdam, represented by Siam rationalists like Cornelis van Isteren and Ben Merkelbach. In the new architecture, the principle of spatial corridors between functionalist blocks was relevant. On the contrary, the Amsterdam school town planning was based on a town structure with streets and places. In the second half of his professional life, the main job of Piet Kramer was architect for canal bridges in Amsterdam, in the municipal public works department in Amsterdam. He made the drawings for more than 500 bridges. So if you visit Amsterdam, you know, most of the bridges you will see were built and imagined, designed by him. The total number of realized Piet Kramer bridges is 222. 64 of them in the Amsterdam's Post Park. Besides the bridges, he often designed the additional bridge houses, ironwork, and landscaping. The sculptural work was generally done by Hildo Krop. After the death of Piet Kramer in 1961, on the high point of the rationalist movement, no architectural institution or museum was interested in his expressionist work. For that reason, all his drawings and models were burned. What a crime, you know, and this testifies about, even within an open-minded and generous society like the Dutch one, how narrow the vision, the human vision is. Because what might not be fashionable today, in a few years or a little later might become relevant again. To burn, you know, the drawings of a master of architecture, you will realize soon how good he was. It seems to be almost inconceivable. And it happened, you know, not too long ago in the second half of the 20th century. Unbelievable. This was the man in his older age, thinking man, but also drawing beautifully. Now, this is the building that was mentioned initially in the text I read, the house of shipping, or the shipping house, from 1913 to 1916. And you will tell me if this is a building whose drawings are to be burned. This is the building. And he worked, as I read, with Michel de Clercq and another architect on it. He was not alone, but it's a rich building. The inside is also splendid. The brickwork is complex, is sensitive, is interesting, you know, it might be, you know, essentially an office building, but it looks like something else. I mean, wherever you look, you discover things, and this kind of richness, expressive richness, which the School of Amsterdam displayed, is astonishing. Look at this. You know, I mean, is this the Cathedral of Shipping? Probably. And he was a young man then, you know, if he would have continued to build in this way, you know, both him and Michel de Clercq were remarkable architects. We know more of De Stijl and Theo van Doesburg and Rietveld than about these people, because expressionists became you know, no one thought of burning the drawings and models of Theo van Doesburg. Instead, they burned the drawings and models of Piet Kramer. But is this a building whose drawings are to be burned? I doubt it. And it's not the only one, you'll see. Look at the interior. It's majestic. I mean, you know, even the minimalist would have to confess that this is not an unimpressive space. This was done with, yes, with work, with talent, with inspiration, with vision. Sorry about this. I mean, look at this, you know, sensitive handling of you know, matter, inert matter. You know, it becomes alive. And it becomes alive exactly because it assumes levels of ornamentation. Look at this entrance. It has character, it has beauty, it has sculpture. It is eventful, plastically eventful. Here is another entrance into the building, and this one also, you know, are we doing this sort of thing today? Not really. Why? Because we are not poorer than you know, 100 years ago. It's a different mentality. Now we arrive at, I can't even read again, worked with Michael de Klerk. I took this information from the Dutch side because the British, I mean, the English language Wikipedia is less generous with information about him. It's a block of flats. It's an apartment building. But look at this, you know, it's a unique building. It has character. It has even a certain monumentality. It has even fluidities. It's an interesting building. Who would do an apartment building today like this? No one. They did it then, and they didn't have parametric design and all the rest. But they had courage, and they had a vision, and they had great craftsmen they worked with. I'm going to show some details of his buildings. You know, these are beautifully built. And I'm not so sure they were so expensive. Actually, these buildings are not for privileged people. There are no millionaires or billionaires living here. There are actually, this is actually social housing. But it was done with people who probably had no other work. So they built in this way. The description that the expensive expression is, I don't know, because again, these are not buildings destined for an elite, you know, for you know, high class or whatever. No, these are buildings built for, and they build many, not just this one. This one is a building in the corner. They are all done in the same way, in an imaginative, rich, plastically engaging way. Of course, the School of Amsterdam thought about and felt about the expression of a building. It's not just about function, it's also about expression. You know, even this service entrance here or whatever it is, it's you know, look at it, you know, in its asymmetry. And of course, this does not belong to Pete Kramer. Look at this window and this window, they are different. There is an asymmetry here, an interesting asymmetry, and it has a plasticity which makes it interesting. The play with the ceramic tiles also is interesting. And they were maybe refurbished or something. All these buildings were built by them, not just this one. The romantic spirit that animated the School of Amsterdam is for all to see. Why Pete Kramer is not better known? Well, I'm asking myself this question. This is in this park. Let's read a little bit about it. It's an interesting story, and he built just a few buildings in a park where other architects were invited to build. So the park was created on the initiative of the Amsterdam tile dealer, that person Arnold Hastie, in the difficult years of the First World War. Hastie commissioned that person, Stahl, whom he knew from the Architectura e Amicizia Society, and approached 4 young architects to work with them. And there was, between them was also, you know, the architect we talk about today, Pete Kramer. Hastie gave them complete freedom in building 17 country houses on a specially purchased plot in Bergen. 7 detached, 2 double, and 2 3-part villas. The only condition was that they would make ample use of hasty styles in the interiors. All villas were built between 1917 and 1918. So, Pete Kramer, let's look at it. It was not preserved. I hope I have a picture of it here. Here it is. Now, this kind of building might be considered, even sustainable today, and arts and crafts, and it does not exist. But there is another building that does exist, and we are going to see it. Here it is. I think is this one. Yes, it's picturesque. Yes, it's a little bucolic. Yes, it's maybe a little bit, too romantic, so to speak, but, and it's also rural in a way, but appropriately placed in a park. This rurality that Pete Kramer, a sophisticated urban architect, was able to address is, I think, a quality. An interesting architect. His bridges are not always very interesting, especially the closer he came towards us in time. They became more and more, simplistic. But at the beginning, he built some interesting bridges as well. This is an apartment building again in Amsterdam. I had the chance to see some of these when I visited Amsterdam many years ago. And what you see in photographs is what I saw myself. Excellent buildings, and built honestly, a brick above another brick above another brick. There is a sensitivity here at work, which, later modernity abandoned. But we might return to this, and paradoxically, we might return to this exactly when there will be an economical crisis. It's possible. Now, we'll look at some bridges. Brugge is a bridge, number 400. I'll go rather quickly here because we still have to look at Yanis Xenakis' work. So bridge after bridge built by Pete Kramer in Amsterdam. Look at it, this interesting building. It has character, and it has it's so whimsical to an extent, with these little windows here, and it's picturesque, much more picturesque than what we see here. So even for an utilitarian little building, if you use imagination, you can arrive at what we look at here. This could have been a flat wall, right? Why did he do this? Well, is it a loss? I don't think it is a loss. Or look at this one. It's like an African mask in a way, or Polynesian mask, or whatever, with the eyes, and it's yes, it is an expressive little structure which was connected with a bridge nearby, with some kind of technical space here. But a technical space doesn't necessarily advocate expressionless exteriorization. Is why not bring expression even into utilitarian little buildings? Or look at this parapet here, with, yes, this requires work, but when you have a large number of people out of work, why not teach them crafts and make them, do useful things and hopefully beautiful things. Look, like here. It's almost a metaphor for a bridge. you know, because a bridge is bridging between two entities. In this, well, in a way, here we see almost, you know, the twisting of the museum built by Bjarke Ingels above a river itself in Norway, which you probably know. Again, this mysterious little building. Now, what do we look at here? Housing, because they had a lot of social interest, these architects. So they built, again, these are not for, you know, an elite. These are for actually underprivileged people. But look what buildings they built for them. It's actually amazing. And this is a famous complex of buildings built by, well, I don't have all the pictures. The author is actually Michel de Clercq, but they work together. Now we arrive at the building that I mentioned in reading the first part of the text I read in the Hague. It's a department store, and look at this. You know, it's impressive. It's impressive. You know, it's very well designed. Maybe you would say, wait a minute, does it have to be so impressive as a department store? Good question. But department stores have monetary power. They hire good architects. Jean Nouvel was hired in London and also in Berlin to do a large department store. And we have a large department store here too, designed by Pete Kramer. Well, the interior is as it is. The merchandise counts. And now here is another picture of the architect. At this point, when I talk, I have a beard kind of like his. I'm not proud of it, but I'm too lazy to cut it. And since I don't leave my apartment, I can become a Tarzan. Another apartment building by Pete Kramer with another whimsical window there at the top. And look at this entrance. You know, yes, I might associate this with Art Deco. Whatever the naming, the naming is not so important in this case. It's the quality of the design and the, you know, the joy of discovering and inventing. Look at this little window here. It in itself is a little creation. And, you know, all these windows, they are crafted for a specific context, for a specific situation. Another bridge. What is this? Another apartment building. Sorry, I didn't have a picture there, but you are going to see other bridges, a few other bridges. This is a patisserie. I feel like eating one of those now, but I can't anyway. He designed everything: bridges, patisserie, blocks of flats, department stores, and you know, rustic villas in a park. Here, of course, you don't look at the architecture; you look at the cookies. Anyway. What is this? Another bridge. Brugge is a bridge, number 43 in Amsterdam. Amsterdam has a lot of bridges. Of course, he himself built just more than 200. Another bridge here, you know, getting a little bit more. You know, they become wider to accommodate more cars and all the rest. We are approaching our time. Well, still we are far away. Almost 100 years ago, this is a. Of course, this is the Netherlands. If you look at the bicycles, but the buildings with the plural were built by Pete Kramer. We see here the building that we already looked at in more detail, that he built together with Michel de Clercq. You see, this is almost a socialist building, cooperative home. It's this social togetherness, this togetherness that the Dutch are good at, that is shown here. Another bridge. It's also the expressionism of the School of Amsterdam. It connects somehow with the Middle Ages in a way. So if you see such buildings, I don't know if he designed this. They don't quite seem designed by Pete Kramer, but there is something, the romanticism of this architecture refers to almost a time prior to the Renaissance. A villa, I'm not so, enthralled by this villa, but it's probably a nice house. Another, what is this? I don't know what it is. I have difficulties with the Dutch language, I confess. I even have difficulties to pronounce correctly the name of Vincent van Gogh or even Rem Koolhaas. Another bridge, brick and other materials. What is this? A monument. And the monument it is by Pete Kramer. Another monument, I don't know, this is not inspired by Boullee, but it's still a sphere. I don't know what it monumentalizes, if we are to call it so. Another bridge, this one is a techno bridge. It's a techno bridge. It's getting closer. It's already the second half of the 20th century. And another bridge. Welcome to the contemporary times in a way, where the car is the king, and this bridge shows it. And now I end this presentation on Pete Kramer with some of his furniture designs and also some beautifully crafted so-called details. Although it was said that in architecture there are no details, in the sense that all parts contribute to a whole, which is reluctant to to be described independently from what we call details. I mean, the pieces of furniture themselves are, crafted with talent and imagination, and it's nice. It's nice. They have character. I mean, I don't know about this chair. It's a little bit burlesque, but maybe because of its proportions. Just this little thing here, if I show it in, look at this, it's just that little thing here. Why was it made in this way, in this so-called complicated way? But I like what I see. It's crocheting, it's embroidering with metal. Who said that ornament is dead? No, 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 it's not dead, and actually it's coming back. If you wouldn't have ornament, you wouldn't have something like this. This is an ornamental approach to architecture, and it gives pleasure, to the eye. Pete Kramer, significant presence in the School of Amsterdam. After Michel de Clercq died, with whom he worked together for a number of years, and I said it earlier, Michel de Clercq died young. Pete Kramer became, in a way, the leader of the School of Amsterdam until it collapsed, so to speak, in the 1930s. But an interesting architectural movement. I always admire the School of Amsterdam. Okay, and now we go to the fourth architect I will talk about today. One who was actually born in Romania, born and raised in Romania, and who later in his life became one of the most important avant-garde composers of music in the world, and that is Yanis Xenakis. Yeah, he was born in 1922 in Brăila, and in Brăila many important cultural figures were born, a truly amazingly large number considering it's not such a big city. And maybe one day we'll talk about just cultural personalities born in Brăila. He lived in Brăila for 9 years, and at the age of 9 he left with his parents, I imagine, to Greece. Of course, his parents were Greek. I'm waiting for the something wrong here with the arrow of my mouse. But anyway, here is a picture of Yanis Xenakis. He had an accident during the Second World War. I don't know what happened to his left eye. And I think it was, well, not I think, I know. He worked for a good number of years for Le Corbusier. But let's not anticipate, let's read a little bit about him. So Yanis Xenakis, as you can see, he died on the 4th of February, 21 years ago, was a Greek-French composer. Wait a minute, it's not even mentioned now. Sorry for being a little bit patriotic, but he was born in Romania and raised in Romania. Music theorist, architect, performance director, and engineer. He actually was trained as an engineer. After 1947, he fled Greece, becoming a naturalized citizen of France. Xenakis pioneered the use of mathematical models in music, such as applications of set theory, stochastic processes, and game theory, and was also an important influence on the development of electronic and computer music. He integrated music with architecture, designing music for pre-existing spaces and designing spaces to be integrated with specific music compositions and performances. For orchestra, which introduced independent parts for every musician of the orchestra, percussion works such as Safa from 1975 and Pleiades from 1979. Compositions that introduce spatialization, spatial from space, spatialization by dispersing musicians among the audience, such as Thor, electronic works created using Xenakis UPIC system, and the massive multimedia performances Xenakis called polytopes that were a summa of his interests and skills. Among the numerous theoretical writings he authored, the book Formalized Music, Thought and Mathematics in Composition is regarded as one of his most important. And as an architect, Xenakis is primarily known for his early work under Le Corbusier, the Saint-Marie de la Tourette, on which the two architects collaborated, and the Philips Pavilion at Expo 58, which Xenakis designed by himself. And the Philips Pavilion might be the most impressive building built by so-called Le Corbusier. It is certainly one of the most impressive, but we will take a look at it, a formidable building, and the experts think that actually Xenakis designed it, not Le Corbusier. But I think the proximity of Le Corbusier and the fact that Xenakis worked for Le Corbusier was positive, was benefic, because he did his most outstanding work actually while collaborating with Le Corbusier. I don't know what this is, some kind of a rendering. I'm not even sure if he did it. We move forward. This is a handmade drawing by Xenakis. He was also visionary, although in his built works, only sometimes he was what might be called visionary. He also assumed the vernacular, and we are going to see a few buildings he built in Greece, which, as someone described them, half, one third Le Corbusier, one third vernacular, and one third something else. These are musical sheets with musical quotations or inscriptions by this revolutionary composer who thought actually, and I watched a video with him, an interview, where he said it's always good to have two jobs, different, work in architecture and do something else, because that something else helps you to create an architecture which is not inhibited and inhibiting. It keeps your mind open. Some urban studies, and then music, back to music. He was fluctuating between music and architecture. Very interesting, graphically, aesthetically, these musical scores. And this is a building he actually built, Polytop, in front of Centre Pompidou in Paris, the Centre Beaubourg, and we are going to see it. It was built. Now, what is this? The tree of knowledge? I don't know, but it's a beautiful drawing, I would say. This man, I think we can assume that he had what is called genius. This is the Philips Pavilion that he built while he worked for Le Corbusier in Brussels, in Belgium, at the World's Fair, and I think it's formidable. It's a great building, and it seems some even think that Ronchamp, the much admired building by Le Corbusier, was influenced by the studies and work of Yanis Xenakis within the office of Le Corbusier. But this is the Philips Pavilion, which apparently he designed it. And even on Wikipedia, you saw it is acknowledged that he was the main designer of this very, very interesting, engaging, and I would say even beautiful building. It was built actually by also in cooperation with a composer, Varese, or Varese, a building based on the projection of Varese's poem Electronique. Inside this pavilion took place a giant projection of a film that you can see on YouTube, made by all three of them, and there are fragments of Le Corbusier's aesthetics there, and even work. Maybe it was some kind of a self-advertising piece, but the building was designed essentially by Yanis Xenakis, the man from Braila. I love this drawing, which is, it's kind of like the drawings of Lina Bobardi, very poetical and almost infantile, which shows, the innocence, the sophisticated innocence, the childlikeness of Yanis Xenakis. But I think any great creator has that child, the inner child. And here the inner child is externalized through this, this is the opposite of a rendering. Most architects would forget to draw like this because they would consider it unskillful and it doesn't sell or whatever. But this was done for his own purpose, not to sell anything, but to study. And I like the innocence of this drawing. And I love the building. Studies, again, calculations, emotion and dimensions together. And this is, even the plan shows the fluidity, the unexpectedness of this building. Here is the author, I think we are not too far away from truth if we say that he was the author of this building, although it was designed while he was working for Le Corbusier. As I said, he had his left eye was affected by war. I don't know exactly what happened. He obviously suffered. He was disfigured. I don't know if you know, but Le Corbusier also had only one eye, functioning eye. Because at 28, Le Corbusier, apparently when he was painting at home or in his studio, something happened to him and he lost his sight in one eye, I think in the right eye. And maybe, I mean, maybe it's a ridiculous and frivolous thought I had that Le Corbusier hired him because, you know, he also had only one functioning eye, just like Yanis Xenakis. Music and Architecture by Yanis Xenakis. This is a subject that interests me too. Let's read here. Music is not a language. Any musical piece is akin to a boulder with complex forms, with striations and engraved designs atop and within, which man can decipher in 1,000 different ways without ever finding the right answer or the best one. Here is the building, the polytope that he built in front of Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris after he left Le Corbusier's office. And, you know, just to have the chance and the honor to build something like this in front of Centre Georges Pompidou, built by, as we know, Sir Richard Rogers and Renzo Piano and Peter Rice, the engineer. Let's not forget the engineer. So to have this chance to build this in Paris shows that, you know, the level of appreciation he received. And the building is, you know, is still stunning by today's standards. Here are two children not far away from this interesting structure built by Yanis Xenakis. Bravo to him. Born in Brăila and building in Paris, an extravagant structure. Then, if this was not enough, also revolutionizing music, because he was one of the most important avant-garde composers of the 20th century. Here he is again, the man who spent 9 years in Brăila. This is a house, we are going to see more images of it. It's a house he built after he left Le Corbusier's office in Greece. We are going to see also his own house, his own building. Here he is in front of La Tourette, of course, the monastery built by Le Corbusier, and Xenakis was the, in a way, the project architect, an important presence in probably even in the conception of the building. Back to that house, but we'll come back to this. Here is a picture of the two architects, and it's kind of funny, but it's also sad that these two architects together had only 2 eyes together and not 4. Le Corbusier had an active functioning eye, and so did Yanis Xenakis. They are here in Brussels in the railway station. Either they arrived from Paris or they were going to Paris and waiting for the train. The master on the left and the younger architect on the right. Bravo again to Yanis Xenakis. And bravo to Le Corbusier also for having the, you know, the inspiration and, you know, the trust to hire an engineer coming from Greece who never studied architecture. But then Le Corbusier was an open-minded man who himself didn't care about the formalities that so much of the world care about. Now, this is the office on Rue de Sèvres that Le Corbusier had. It's a corridor, actually, of a former monastery. And you can tell that Xenakis had an important position within the office, because he is in the foreground. Here is Le Corbusier, here is Yanis Xenakis. But do you know who this rather sad and, you know, frail man is? He's a Pritzker Prize laureate, B.V. Doshi. the Indian architect who himself didn't study architecture in a formal school and received a few years ago the Pritzker Prize in Architecture, deservedly. He deserved it. Bravo to him. Bravo to all these three men. Look, 1, 2, and 3. None of them studied architecture for a second in a school, and they achieved the highest results in architecture. Here is the paradigmatic architect of the 20th century, Le Corbusier, a Pritzker Prize laureate who built an architecture school in Ahmedabad. He founded it and designed it and built it, Doshi, and the remarkable architect and musician born in Brăila and raised in Brăila for 9 years, and we know the 7 years count, Yanis Xenakis. Bravo to them. Here they are, you know, with the young man, Yanis, young Xenakis in the back. And here maybe this is Varese and Le Corbusier playing with the model. Le Corbusier, of course, with his eternal hat on his head, when he began to lose hair, he was like this even inside the church. He didn't care. Back to the pavilion built by Xenakis. And here we see, I discovered, I don't know who wrote this, who made this. You see a circle is Le Corbusier, a circle is Yanis Xenakis, and at the meeting, the intersection of the two circles is Notre Dame du Haut Étrangeant. Whoever made this believed that the presence, the influence of Yanis Xenakis on the famous chapel that Le Corbusier built was big, as you can see. The circle of representing, symbolizing Yanis Xenakis is not smaller. You know, the diameter is not smaller, it's equal to the one representing, symbolizing Le Corbusier. Not a little thing at all. And look at the beauty of the plan of the Philips Pavilion in Brussels. It is beautiful, it is irrational, it is fluid, and it is done with numbers. We saw this already, this drawing, this image. Here he is, you know, as a composer. Bravo to him. I am really emotional when I have the chance to talk about a man who, you know, achieved excellence both in architecture and in music. Bravo to him. And he probably transformed suffering into joy, because it is joyous to be able to create. Here is a scene with a movie that they projected inside the Philips Pavilion. You can see again this movie. If you search on YouTube for Le Corbusier Philips Pavilion video, you are going to find it on YouTube, and you can watch it. The building is remarkable. It truly is. It's actually timeless. It was destroyed, unfortunately. It should not have been destroyed. But then we read that the Homo sapiens burned the drawings of Pete Kramer. They destroyed this, I would say, this masterpiece in architecture. We have the photographs. It could be rebuilt, but it's a loss. It's a great loss. What can we say? It's a great loss. I don't know what. This is sketches by Yanis Xenakis. Musical sheets, musical notations, musical scores of this avant-garde composer. You see, it even has his name. I mean, I found this image on Google Images. Xenakis, not Le Corbusier, the Philips Pavilion in Brussels or Bruxelles. It is a beautiful building. It is. Another scene with showing a projection from the video that they displayed on the large surfaces of the pavilion. Can you do this with the T-square and the rectangle? Maybe, I mean, but the imagination has to be free from the restrictions of the T-square and the rectangle. This is the man who suffered, no doubt, because he was disfigured during the deadly Second World War. I don't know exactly the circumstances, but as you can see, and yet this man transcended suffering through creation, and such is an example. and an inspiration. We saw this drawing with urbanism by him, other studies. Again, the Philips Pavilion and just compare the pavilion that Le Corbusier and Xenakis, or Xenakis and Le Corbusier built, with the pavilion of Austria, which has a high level of architecture, of course, but here we have genius. Here we might have, reticence and rationalism, but this building is something else. Why would such a building be destroyed? Now, maybe it was built of ephemeral materials. It's possible that too, but I don't know. Whatever, it was built, it was photographed, and it is magnificent. And it's so forward looking, and look at the cars. Yes, the cars are beautiful too in a different way, nostalgically looking at them. But this building is futuristic, if I am to use a rather predictable and vulgar word. If you build this building today, it would still stand out dramatically. And it was based on mathematics. This is a project done by, or a study by this person, I don't know, a student or something, connecting Xenakis with Antoni Gaudi and so on. So he is considered in a, in a certain, in the vicinity of certain names, bravo to him again. Here he is, living rather modestly, I imagine. I don't know about his wrist watch, seems to be a little bit flamboyant and big and wide, but I like the beautifully organized books here at the top. Just like in a photograph of Le Corbusier in his room when he was younger, the books were in this array, just like they are in this case. We saw this picture. Here he is teaching about computer, some are they Japanese or something, these children. This is La Tourette monastery with an interesting architecture here. I always wondered what this would represent. Very apparently unskillfully done. Of course, the building is considered one of the important works by Le Corbusier, but Ioannis Xenakis had a role in the musical rhythm of these vertical elements here on this corridor, and he was probably a project architect at La Tourette. These are other images at La Tourette. I visited it, and I have to say the liturgical space per se, to me, although it is rectangular, was more impressive than Ronchamp. I admired it very much. A view from the outside, other views from towards the courtyard of this important work by Le Corbusier and Xenakis. Back to a page with images and drawings of the Philips Pavilion. Music. Here we see music and Daniel Lipskin, because Daniel Lipskin, when he created the Jewish Museum in Berlin, was also flirting with music or inspired by music. A relationship between music and architecture is to be contemplated. Back to the Philips Pavilion. This is a nice presentation board done more recently with a project. It's a whole work of art. It's measurable, it's immeasurable, it's rational, it's irrational, it's everything actually. I like it very, very, very much. Back to La Tourette. The construction of the pavilion in Brussels, model, or this is a different kind of building, maybe inspired by it, I don't know. La Tourette again, and here is a picture with Magister Ludi, if I am to use the words that one of the participants here used the other day. Le Corbusier contemplating the rather surprising religious building, if we are to call it so. And the monks do not protest. Here is probably, it might be that this is actually Xenakis. And what is also interesting is that initially, apparently Le Corbusier didn't want to build even Rochon. I think I'm not too far away from truth if I state that Le Corbusier was rather undecided about the question of God. He might have had atheistic leanings. He didn't want to build initially Ronchamp. And it was a remarkable monk who loved abstract art and modern artists, a friend of Matisse and maybe a friend of Le Corbusier, Couturier, who convinced him to build it. So Ronchamp came into being thanks to the insistence of this monk, Couturier. And maybe he also convinced him to build a monastery, which doesn't look like a monastery, but the monks don't protest and didn't protest. And now we see, we are approaching the end of the presentation, we see two works done by Xenakis by himself after he left the office of Le Corbusier. Villa Mash from Amorgos Island in Greece is this one. From afar, you think there are several buildings, several pavilions, and they are, but there is also a unity, and we are going to see a view from the top here. An interesting building, and I found these images on a site, on a building, on a site, on a website created by an architect from Suceava, from Romania. A very good website called Of Houses. And you can find there, it's called a site dedicated to old forgotten buildings, houses, old forgotten houses. And you can find beautiful pictures, and there is no text, not much text, just the accreditation of the photographs and a few notes, just a note. But through those images, much is being said. So this was built by Xenakis by himself after he left Le Corbusier's office. We are going to see and end with also images of his own house. A little bit surprising, both this building and his own house, if we compare them with the Polytop and the Philips Pavilion. Interesting also these windows, maybe a sculptor would create such windows, and not often an architect. We are going to see also an image from the inside. On this side of houses, it was described a work which, part Le Corbusier, part vernacular, and part something else. This is a view from the interior of the house by Yanis Xenakis, who was a creator through and through. It didn't matter if it was in music or architecture or who knows what else. And this is his own house, the Xenakis house. I took the images from the same site that I mentioned from 1996. So he built it 5 years before he died. He died in 2001, so 21 years ago. Here it is, rather surprising. I mean, you wouldn't expect easily from the man who designed and conceived, apparently almost by himself. Of course, he had Le Corbusier looking over his shoulder, the Philips Pavilion, but this is what he built for himself, of course, later in life. This image makes me think a little bit. Of course, the windows are very different, but because of the circularity of Konstantin Melnikov's own house in Moscow, the so-called bourgeois architect, when in fact he was an artist, and an artist, a true artist, who can never be a bourgeois per se. And here is probably a last image of the presentation with Yanis Xenakis' house in the south of France. This is not in Greece any longer. Sorry about this. This is part of another presentation. So I stopped the recording here, and sorry that Xenakis